Hey everyone, this is Erica Lucas, your host and founding member of VEST, an organization connecting women across industries, regions, and career levels, so that together we can expedite the pipeline of more women in positions of power and influence. Welcome to another episode of the Vester podcast, where we explore the invisible barriers holding women back in the workplace and share stories of women building power collectively.
I'll go out on a limb and say more women on corporate boards will change the culture and the face of corporate America forever. There was a time when everybody on a board was a white man that was retired.
The last 5 years, the institutional investors, this is the BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, and the big pension funds, made a concerted effort to put board diversity on the map. It started with a big push for women, and now the push is overall racial and ethnic diversity and gender diversity. And they did that because they found the compelling elements that companies and boards work smarter and have better shareholder returns, better returns in general, better corporate cultures, etc., when there is diversity, both in the C-suite and the board.
With many women still not returning to work after COVID-19 lockdowns, and many of them still reporting high numbers of burnout, it can be difficult to find reasons to be optimistic about the state of women in business. But here's one highlight. A recent report from the Women Business Collaborative and 50/50 Women on Boards found that 2021 was a watershed year for women on corporate boards, with the largest ever year-over-year increase in board seats held by women. In this session, we talked to Esther Aguilera, President and CEO of the Latino Corporate Directors Association, and VEST member Beverly Carmichael, former C-suite executive and board director at multiple companies, including Blue Apron and Viad Corp, about the gaps we still have to overcome and how we can position ourselves to serve on corporate boards so that together we can advance diversity in the boardroom. For Esther's and Beverly's full bio, go to www.vester.co/podcast. This recording was part of a more intimate coaching session with VEST members and has been repurposed to accommodate this episode.
Esther, why don't you maybe start off and tell us a little bit about your career, how you landed at LCDA, and what does LCDA do?
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you, Erica and Beverly, for having this chat. So I was raised in California, and I moved to Washington, D.C. in 1990 after college. And I've been here over 30 years, and I worked on Capitol Hill. I worked in the federal government. I worked in running nonprofits, and lately that's the nonprofit work and association work has been what's been driving me. And one theme that's been constant for me is one of my passions is to elevate women and Latinos and other people of color to positions of power and claim our seat at the table. And so when the Latino Corporate Directors Association was being formed, they reached out. I had grown and scaled up other nonprofits. And so I took on the role of CEO at a time when it was really at the ground level. So it's been fascinating. That was barely 6 years ago. And in a very short period of time, we have really put the organization on the map. So we are an organization that prepares and promotes, in this case, Latinos for corporate boards. And I work in coalition with many other organizations focused on women, Asian community, Black, and also LGBTQ. So it's a whole community lifting us up. One thing that I will just to set the framework for this, Beverly, it really has been the last 5 years, the institutional investors, this is the BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, and the big pension funds, made a concerted effort to put board diversity on the map. It started with a big push for women, and now the push is overall racial and ethnic diversity and gender diversity. And they did that because they found the compelling elements that companies and boards work smarter and have better shareholder returns, better returns in general, better corporate cultures, et cetera, when there is diversity, both in the C-suite and the board. And as you know, they're as investors, for them, they want to have returns for their pensioners and their clients. And so it has been that business case that really put this issue on the map. So you might have seen some recent reports by 50-50 Women on Boards and others. 50-50 Women on Boards, I'm an advisor to that organization as well. Started out with trying to get 20% of the Russell 3000 of women. And today, now we reached that. And so now the goal is 50%. So there's been some good progress. And a lot of it did start with institutional investors. Plus, you had NASDAQ, which you might have heard about this. This is obviously the major exchange. And they also had a policy rule that they want their companies that are listed in the exchange to have at least one or more women and diversity on the boards. There's been many other types of movements and changes along these lines that have really put the issue on the map. I'll stop there. I just wanted to give you the framework of why we're talking about this today and the fact that we're seeing the needle move as a result of this environment, and it continues.
Yeah, Esther, thank you for that. That's really good foundational sort of background as we talk about this topic. So it sounds like that there's new sort of appetite for women and people of color on boards. So if as people are thinking about whether or not this might be something for them, what should they be thinking about as they maybe prepare themselves for a board role?
Sure. Well, first, it's never too soon to know about it, learn about it, and find out, if this is something for you. Today, there's so much uncertainty in the markets and in business that, there is a lot at stake, when you take on a corporate board seat. Keeping that in mind. It's very different than a nonprofit board, obviously, nonprofit service, and you get exposure to governance. I would say the difference is that for-profit or large private company boards, the stakes are greater, right? So the companies look for individuals that can come in to guide and ask the right questions to make sure that there isn't a stone unturned, so that the company is sustainable and profitable moving forward. And so oftentimes some of the skill sets that they look for, depending on where you are in your career, first, focus on, if you are in the private sector or in business, focus on being the best leader in that space and gaining key experience that boards seek. Of course, the more that you rise to a SVP level or C-suite level, the more that you would be sought after to be able to guide and be part of that board. That's just a reality. So first, focus on what I like to tell women is, look, we need to be in the CEO seats. Let's make sure we're, supporting each other and building that kind of rapport. So, build your expertise. Second is make sure that you're active in LinkedIn or other panels. You don't want to be the best kept secret, basically. Number two is if there is a trending board topic, which there's plenty, everything from supply chain to, the corporate culture to, everything from cybersecurity, what your expertise might be, is, start establishing yourself in your brand and your public persona, as, also in your areas of expertise, and make sure people know about those. And then, of course, the third is networking. 75% of the time you get on your first board through individuals that know you and see that you bring very thoughtful and good lens to some of the toughest topics and issues of the country.
This networking topic, it's one of the things that I think many women are uncomfortable doing, and yet so much is accomplished through networking. And so I would just encourage our group and women in general to just really try to get more comfortable with networking. It's not as ominous as it sounds. So many of these appointments are basically, who do you know and who knows you? So that's really important. So you mentioned a little bit about nonprofits. Is getting on a nonprofit board, could that be a step toward, or does that give you an advantage to get on a corporate board? What are your thoughts about that, Esther?
Well, first, as I mentioned from the start, that the investors, and these are the shareholders. So the board is accountable, as you know, to the shareholders. And the shareholders is not only asking for there to be, different points of views and a robust conversation in that boardroom with, especially composition on the boardroom that better reflects the customer base, the employee base, et cetera. So that is, one of the key areas for nonprofit boards. Again, the primary thing is your experience that you would bring to that boardroom. If you're looking at nonprofit board service, what we always advise is, take a look at one. You want to pick a board that you love the subject matter and you want to contribute and be passionate about, but also consider who is on that board. Think about some Nationwide or others. If there's other individuals on that board that are on corporate boards or, in key influential positions, that helps you to broaden your network and have other people see you and how you contribute in that boardroom. It's not nonprofit board service alone is not a definer for a corporate board. It's really that network. So think about who you're networking with, who you're spending, not only your professional time, but also your volunteer time with. That would be the one way that could help.
I agree with that. I joined a number of nonprofit boards before I joined a corporate board. And while they are very different, as you say, I think a couple of things that really help. One is that you are showing an interest in board governance, even though it's different, but an interest. But I cannot underscore enough the opportunity to network with people on that board. It's a funny thing. I one of my corporate jobs, I was the head of HR at Ticketmaster. And one of the things that we learned through research was the number one reason that people didn't go to an event is because they didn't know about it. So if you want to be on a board, I don't think you should assume that people know that. You have to let people know. And of course, as you said before, Esther, you do have to prepare. And we can talk a little bit more about preparations because it is a very different interview. It's a different resume. It's very different from your day-to-day job. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit, if you would, about kind of the difference between, in other words, what do boards do versus, sort of two sides of the table. There's the executives and the operators, and then there's the board. what's the difference and how do you know whether or not you'd be good on the other side of the table, if you will?
Well, first, as if you are in an operating role, you actually have to leave that at the doorstep. So, boards are, they say, like nose and, your head in, but your hands out. From a legal perspective, it is the executive team that needs to carry out the functions of obviously the business as well as what kind of direction the board gives. So you're not in the operating role. Sometimes that's sometimes the toughest part for executives transitioning from, being an executive to the boardroom. They're like, oh, but I can take this on. But it really is asking those right questions, probing. There's a lot of continuing education for directors because there's so much that is impacting business today. And, being able to keep a pulse on all of that really matters. I was saying earlier, keep coming back to these investors. The investors, besides wanting to see that diversity, are also asking for a skills matrix. So take a look at more companies are publicizing their skills matrix of the directors. And that gives you a good idea of what types of skills they're looking for, who's on those boards. We look at a lot of proxy statements, and it always will announce someone that's new on a board and give a little synopsis of the skill sets that they bring. So that's always really helpful. Beverly, I did want to, just as a little bit of a reality check, the search firm Heidrick and Struggles puts together an annual board census. So they look at who was appointed to boards every year. And the 2022 report covers who was appointed to boards last year in 2021. And they break it down by gender and different skill sets. And so, for example, there were about 450 directors appointed. This covers Fortune 500 companies. So this is, obviously the top companies out there. About 450 board seats turned over, and they got someone new in. So that gives you a universe. And of those, still 40% were current or former CEOs. 14% were CFOs, and another 16% were COOs of companies. I mean, so together that's 70%. Now, that number used to be 90%, so it's come down. And companies that brought on another C-suite level executive was about 30%. That's the difference. And so you kind of get that idea clearly if you're a woman who is in those types of roles and C-suite, C-level, a large P&L, having run a large P&L and having known what the ins and outs are of doing that is very helpful. So again, those types of roles are a company-wide strategic role or a global role. That's a depth of experience to make sure that boardroom, they only have so many seats, that they have all the different skill sets around the table. We've got now the other number that has been going up in terms of the gender balance. 45% of those appointed were women. This is a huge jump from 5 years ago, where it was maybe, in the teens, 12, 13%. So that's going up. There is a demand for women in these types of roles that I mentioned to you. So that's, and again, that little, now 62% are active executives. I think there's more of an aperture for, and there is some aperture for younger executives as well. But again, looking at the figures, it just does give you a sense of what these companies need and look for, and take a look at some other company, the matrix of the skill sets around that table.
Yeah, those are really good stats. So, we can kind of see where we've been and kind of the trend of where we're going. One of the things that I have seen, and I appreciate your comment about boards looking for younger people. There was a time when everybody on a board was a white man that was retired and hadn't worked in years. And these board seats, typically you're on a board for sometimes 10 years or so. So there is a change, and companies, as they think about diversity, they're actually thinking about diversity of all kinds, and age being one of them. I also think that we're also seeing more and more, or let's say fewer people that are retired, more people that are actively working. I do believe CEOs, investors, all of that believe that around the boardroom, if somebody has current and relevant experience, they're arguably adding more value on that board than someone who has just hadn't worked in 10 years and is just kind of coming to the board meetings for the nice dinners and the trip to New York or wherever the meetings are. So that is good. The other thing that I think we're going to start to see more, and as Esther mentioned, CEOs and CFOs are almost always kind of on everybody's mind for board work, but we are seeing more them looking for more skills. Esther mentioned a skills matrix. They're looking at, like, do we have a diversity of expertise on the board? So some of the new things that we're seeing is cybersecurity. They want somebody on the board that knows a little bit something about cybersecurity. Every company's, thinking about that. Digital, sustainability. If you think about, that is on a lot of companies' minds. And one of the things I'm very happy to see is people are looking at people with HR backgrounds, because these companies do what they do through people. Mm-hmm. And it's surprising how many boards have nobody on the board that has a good sense of people and culture. So all of those things are changing. These are good changes. As Esther said, we've made a lot of progress in women. I would say women and people of color have made less progress. And so, Esther, thinking about people of color, what advice maybe would you have to encourage people of color to express interest in boards, and boards to express interest in people of color, and understand that is a diversity that adds some real value? What advice would you have for people in that space?
As I said from the start, you don't want to be the best kept secret. You do want to, and Beverly mentioned it, work on your value proposition and be able to have a conversation about, one, what you bring to the table, what your skill sets and the value that you bring, and have conversations with people that you know, so that you're also asking some smart questions. There's so much happening in the boardroom that you can always pick up the conversation with a colleague, certainly somebody that asks your colleagues to introduce you to also others that are on boards. The more you're circulating, you want to be top of mind, because that director, once you're on your first board, the biggest hurdle is that first board, right, Beverly?
Yes.
Once you're on, then you start getting calls about who you might know and or, about a board opportunity. And, someone will say, well, I can't take that on, but I just had a really smart conversation, with Michelle. You really should get to know her. And that's really important. And there's just so much more requirements and so much more at stake. I mean, we are in a time of uncertainty. And so current executives are more at the front lines today of what is impacting the bottom line and what is impacting customers. Someone someone in the chat about CMOs. C-suite, CMOs are C-suite. That is a skill set that brings a lot of value. So, that's important. And, continuing to have, all of those conversations and keeping top of mind what's at stake. I'm looking here at some of these. They looked at of those individuals appointed. A large percent had some international experience, about 60%. Social media and digital experience or marketing was 41% of those appointed in the various categories. Financial risk, compliance, another 41%. Every cyber came next, sustainability, and DE&I was at 5%. So that gives you other insights. Again, this is a macro level. There's a lot of detail in different skill sets, and folks are brought on for different reasons. But that's a little bit of a glimpse of, what that looks like.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think the message there is for you not to think, oh, well, I'm not a CEO or a CFO, so I shouldn't think about boards. That is not the message. There are lots of skill sets, and chances are you have a skill set or some value that you can add to a board. One of the things, and Esther alluded to this, is you do need to be able to articulate what your value is. You need to be able to articulate, look at the current board, who's on it, what skill sets are there, and what skill sets are not there. And chances are, if you find that you could add value where there is none, where there is no skill set, you will have a better chance of being selected there. I want to go back to this sort of diversity piece. For years, literally for years, search firms, recruiters would always say, well, we just don't know any qualified women, or we don't know any qualified Latinos. We don't know any qualified African-American people, and, all of us who are in that space, all of us, which is all of us, we know that's not the case. One of the things that I've been pleasantly pleased to see is there are a number of organizations that are developing sort of profiles of lots and lots of people, so that recruiters can't say, we just don't know anyone. This is not a supply problem. It's an issue of accessing the supply that is available. So that is really something to know. And the other thing I would really emphasize that Esther mentioned is, I almost never get a call about a board seat that I don't recommend someone else, at least, and I try to our earlier point, if people have let me know they're interested and I believe that they have properly prepared themselves, I almost never hang up the phone without saying, I'm not interested, or I don't have the bandwidth for this, but how about Michelle? How about I'm going to send you Jill's information, et cetera, and you might want to talk with her. We're accustomed to doing this as women, but we need to send that elevator down, if you will. One thought that I have, and I've thought about this myself, how do you decide whether a board is right for you? In other words, you get a call and it's from some company either that you've heard about or that you haven't heard about. How do you decide what's right for you? Because these board appointments, they are typically, even though you're elected either annually or every 2 or 3 years, they can go on for a decade, and you want to make sure you're on the right board. How do you decide? Or Esther, what's your advice about deciding what's the right board for you?
Excellent question. Well, definitely ask questions, make sure that it's a culture and a type of company that you can trust. One of the primary areas is ask yourself, okay, how do they make money? I mean, this is a first question. And if, you've got pharmaceuticals or you have, companies, and if the product and how they make money, you find is ethical and it's something that you can see, obviously, for many years supporting and being part of that board, I think that's really, it seems like a no-brainer, but that's question number one. Do a lot of research. There's activist investors are right now, there's been an increase in their activity. Well, they'll go after companies and say, look, you don't have the right people around your table, or your business model, you're not leveraging it the right way. I'm an investor and I want to see changes. There's a lot of that's another area that is really challenging businesses in many ways. And so that's why you want to make sure you're thinking like an activist to say, okay, so what is it about, the business line, or where are there opportunities, and having those kinds of, is this a place where I can contribute, and where the culture and the integrity and everything is what I can put my name behind. Those are a few things to think about. Beverly touched. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, please finish.
Well, there's, she discussed the fact that, what's happening is, mentioned 43% of new appointees are first-time directors. So there's an increase in first-time director interest there, which is helpful. The other piece that is weighing in is that investors and companies, they don't want the current active CEOs to have more than one or two external board seats, because the roles today are so challenging. You've got so much on your plate that, that opens up opportunities, obviously, for others. And, there's just so many variables and factors that weigh in.
Yeah. I always think about also, just look at the board and the board members, and it's just like anything else. Do I like these people? Do I want to spend the time? And to Esther's point, you will spend a lot of time, and if there's ever any difficulty in the company for the board, you're going to spend even more time. So, do you like the people? Do you like the product? Do you use the product? If it is that product, I can name a few companies, but I won't, that I just would never be on the board with, because I don't care for their mission, their product, and a whole host of other things. But there are plenty of companies that I would love to be on their board because of what they do, what their values are, who the people are, and all of that. So do think about that. It is, this is not one of those things that you have to take the first board opportunity you get, because it may not be the right board for you. Go ahead.
So being on boards for the past, I would say 5 years, all only in nonprofits, boards, and I'm very passionate about it. But a lot of time consuming. I mean, I think that I cap at 4 boards because I couldn't do anymore. I'm curious about the transition in the future when you move from the nonprofit to the corporate world, which I've never been on a board in a corporate world. What is the transition of when you should get paid to be on that board or not? I mean, how did you get there?
Well, first, all public and large private company boards do pay. So it's all public information. You can, go in and find out about that. So they're looking for people with certain skill sets that are going to contribute and get paid for that. And Beverly, I mean, depending on the size of the company, it can range from $50,000 to $300,000 a year or more, depending again on the complexity and the size of the company. So that already comes with a job description. You don't work towards it. They're looking for folks that bring in already a certain amount of experience to help navigate the future and navigate, the business lines.
Thank you. This is a great subject. My question is sort of something I've noticed and would appreciate your guidance, but I've noticed an uptick in like scamming services. So people who say, if you subscribe to our services, we'll get you on a corporate board. Can you provide any guidance on is that ever a reputable, way to approach this? Or do you have thoughts or guidance on the best way to secure corporate board memberships?
Great question. Well, first, I would be wary. No one can guarantee a board seat. One thing that Beverly said early on, the supply side, I'll tell you that still directors today, 30% of them think that their hurdle to getting more diversity is because there isn't the supply. What we've done in our organization is we have two membership groups. One is experienced directors, and the other are the board aspiring executives that we prepare and position for the boardroom. We get board search requests. So find an organization that maybe does this, and there's plenty of women's organizations and others. So last year we helped and we supported 219 either search firms or directly with companies on their board requests. There's always a certain skill set that they look for. And so we go through our membership and individuals that fit that profile and send them over. And that has helped a great deal. So it's, I would be wary of anyone that says they can guarantee any of it. Now, there is some things you can do for yourself. As I mentioned, first is really focus on that skill set, right, that you're going to bring to the table. And then when you have that, there are plenty of organization from women corporate directors to 50-50 women on boards to other networks that might help network you in. There's a National Association of Corporate Directors. We're partners, and it's the largest national group. If you're on a public or nonprofit board, you can be a member of NACD. Just there is an investment there as well, and there's no guarantees that you'll get on a board. It does help to be in the circles and in the network, but it's, I kind of described again what some of those skill sets are. If you bring those skill sets and you're a woman, you're sought after. Yes, go for it. If you're continuing with your career trajectory, one thing to think about, and Beverly and I talked about this a little bit more, is today there's more of a time demand for directors because, again, there's so much not only uncertainty, risk that companies face, and you need to be super prepared. I've had some of our members who joined a corporate board, and before they knew it, in this case, it was Papa John's, and the CEO kind of came under the spotlight. And so the board, this was like a full-time job. So you have to also think about what time in your career might make sense, because if you're a full-time executive and, there's no way to manage it, but, so that's something else to think about, is that it's really not, as Beverly mentioned, it's not something that you go in and, sit there without all the preparation and then you go home. It's an all-in, more immersive today than ever before. But at the same time, today's executives and, the young leaders, mid-level and others are best prepared because you're seeing what's going on the ground.
Yeah, what I would add also to what Esther said, Gina, I can't think of any reason why you should pay anybody to do anything around getting on a board. I mean, there are a few subscription services that are a small nominal amount that actually combine all of the potential openings, and you can take a look at that. They're not the search firm, but that's something like $25-$30 a year or something like that. But I can't think of anything that any reason why you should pay someone. And I do think that if they're suggesting that you pay them, they'll get you on a board. That probably is a scam. So I would not fall for that at all. And I think this idea around time commitment is really important. One of the things that if you are currently working and you're interested in a board, the first thing you should do is ask your employer if they are open to you joining a board, because a lot of companies simply don't let their executives or their employees be on boards. Just for various reasons, they don't. So that's the first thing you should do. And then if they are, if you do have permission to be on a corporate board, then you really ought to think about the time commitment. One of the reasons that I mentioned earlier is like if I get a call, I simply cannot do any more. I say retired, but I'm not tired, but I will be tired. A lot of days I am tired because there's a lot of work in the board work that I do, and I simply couldn't take on any more and do the board that I'm on any justice. And one of the things you cannot do is phone this stuff in. When you are on a board, you are expected to prepare for meetings. There's quarterly meetings, by the way. There's committee meetings in addition to that. And to Esther's point, if there is any kind of difficulty in the company, particularly as it relates to the CEO or the reputation of the company, the board could be doing something almost every day. So you need to really factor that in.
If I can chime in quickly on that, Gina. So it's not to say that you don't want to invest in your journey to the boardroom. It is something you want to do. There is something like the board bio. We have templates for that. You can also, hire someone to help make sure that your board bio really has the right. You want to focus on, again, your value proposition, what you bring to the table in your industry or functional expertise, whether it's M&A or you helped, with you take the company public, et cetera. You want to highlight those business that you don't want to say, I am an executive that have this kind of executive role supporting X, Y, and Z, but it's really a little different. So invest in that. Our organization, there is membership dues, again, because there's all the education and all the services that we provide. So there will be, some investment. Same with NACD. They're much larger, and to go to their events, there's, good cost for that registration. But it's the point that Beverly said, if someone's coming to you and saying, I can get you on a board, you pay this, that's when you want to be wary. There's a lot of great organizations that you should consider to, be part of that do this kind of work and focus. Have to find out, is this the right time for me?
Yeah, and Esther mentioned this board bio, and that they have templates. That bio is really important. That is your calling card, if you will. And I will tell you, in my personal experience, I probably did at least 10 versions of my bio before I got it the way that I was comfortable with it. And a wonderful woman who's on several boards helped me with it. She looked at all of those versions. She gave me feedback, et cetera. And I finally got it to the point that I was comfortable with it. And there was an exponential difference between the calls and success rate, if you will, that I received after I got my board bio the way I liked it and the way it should be. So do not underestimate the value of putting together a really good board bio. It's not a resume, it's one page. There's a lot of, and as Esther said, there's templates. There are a lot of good templates. Use that. But I'm completely convinced, while I was the same person the whole time, when my bio got better, my phone began to ring more, and I was selected far more often.
Yeah, no, on that board bio as well, you don't think about it as linear. Usually, you talk about what you're doing today, and when your bio will have your previous job, and it'll put it chronologically. Think about your board bio to put front and center any major brand, recognizable brand that others will notice, if that's the case, or again, that skill set or functional expertise. If you bring the international, the cyber, the social media marketing, again, looking at those skills matrix will show you sort of what from companies, who's around that table and what folks look for. You want to have those at the top. We have lots of members who just bring so much experience that they have like 20 different things, and we tell them you have to prioritize and focus. What are your top 3 or 4? Now, you could have 2 different board profiles if you did a lot of work in M&A, and let's say you have a board request that is looking for someone with experience, and you have that experience, but it's not your top 3. You can do a slightly different version of your board bio that focuses on what you contributed in that space. So, sometimes one board bio, because you don't want it to be more than a page or 2 at the max. You sometimes need another one that focuses on an industry you worked in, or a P&L that you ran.
I'm wondering, going back to the comment, Beverly, you made about your fiduciary responsibilities and the possibility of being involved in a controversial corporation or one that's not doing so well, around the liability risk and the insurance you carry. Do you carry separate insurance from what the corporation offers in order to protect yourself in cases of conflicts of interest?
Shannon, that's a really good question. We probably should have covered this before. So first of all, one of the questions you must ask before you join a board is, do you have directors and officers insurance? Now, most of them do. Then, and if they don't, you want to run like really fast, because there's all, even if there's nothing that the board or even the company did wrong, that doesn't mean you won't get sued. Anybody who's been involved in business, sometimes you just get sued just because. So you will want to make sure that there's directors and officers insurance, and ask for the limits and all of that. And when that's the case, which it should be, else you shouldn't join the board, then you don't need to carry any special individual insurance for that purpose. One of the things, Esther, we didn't talk about is, so you're in the mix for a board search. Who actually makes the decision to select the person to join the board? And often these are extremely competitive and lots of good candidates. But who makes the decision to select a person for a board?
Yeah. So, there's been a shift in this. In the past, the CEO was more involved in this decision-making, working with the search firms and bringing people forward. But here again, investors and shareholders did not want a super cozy, it has to be an independent board versus being so aligned with the CEO. And so, today you have a nominating and governance committee. And that committee is charged with working sometimes with bringing together candidates or hiring a search firm to bring those candidates together. And that's, sort of the first line. Ultimately, it's the entire board that votes on it, but that's the process that brings them in. The other trending thing is a separation. Before, you had a lot of chairman and CEOs of companies. So they were both the CEO and chair of the board. Well, that is diminishing a lot more. Again, investors want some independence and want there to be a CEO, but a separate independent chair. If you have a situation where there is a board, a CEO and chairman, they'll often assign an independent director that would be the lead independent director. So those are and that's why the role of the nominating and governance committee is so important, to bring and vet the candidates. And they might, have the entire board interview, the top 3 or so. Sometimes they'll ask for a subset of the board to interview. Others, they'll want everyone involved in that. So they help manage that process. Now, that's not to say, I think the CEO still plays a big role to make sure that one, that input on, is this someone we can work with? Is this someone that CEO can work with? They're still fundamental in that process, but it is really more an independent in that nominating and governance committee.
And since most boards work through their committees, if you have an opportunity to chair or be on the Nom and Gov committee, that is probably the place where you will have the most influence on who the next people are on your board.
Yeah. And unfortunately, sometimes it does come down to who they know. If they get candidates and someone says, oh, well, I did either work with that person or I know someone, and so that, unfortunately, this network effect still impacts a lot of that. What I would also advise is, if you get approached about a board, reach out to someone. We do, our membership will coach, and they do a lot of coaching for others getting on their first board, because, they have had the experience or they're on NomGov, and they can kind of see what things help a candidate shine versus what might not. And so first, obviously, do your homework on the company and every individual on that board, then seek out some coaching and advice, like what should I be thinking about? What are some no-nos? Or they really just want to have a conversation and be more relaxed about it, to really get to know you, so, that's never, always be prepared, and, never hesitate to ask for, support or practice with somebody else.
If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a review and subscribe to our podcast for future episodes. You can also join the conversation by becoming a VEST member. Go to www.vester.co and apply today.